We're basically a verticalized energy company. We've essentially built about 10 companies at once across the energy stack. Everything from building wind and solar farms, acquiring them and operating them, like in-house trading desks on power markets, to like, regulated supply businesses that, supply customers and bill them for their energy every month. We now provide 200,000 homes with energy and bill them every month for it. So it's been crazy growth. We're above 300 mil ARR now. This is huge for us and huge for the industry overall. What it represents is, like, for starters, like months of constructive engagement with the SEC. What we're looking to do is coordinate flexible, smart energy devices that are distributed through millions of homes already, just sitting there unused. Coordinate them to shift energy to essentially reduce network congestion at times of peak demand.
Before we really jump into it, I noticed your Twitter bio, which I thought was a great place to jump off from. But the Empire State Building was built in 410 days during the Great Depression. Curious why you thought that was interesting and why America doesn't build like that anymore.
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's like something that we actually see, a lot of in the work we do, which is kind of, around big and small infrastructure projects. Like a lot of, there's a lot more red tape around things than there used to be. And, from my perspective, like, we've had this amazing industrial era that we came through, kind of last century, where we built these essentially mega structures. And to a certain extent, today we've kind of forgotten how to build these big projects. And like, I think we've just, there's a real balance between, like progress and preservation. And I think we're kind of erring towards too far in one direction now. So I think, one of the things that we're really trying to push forward here is, and what we're kind of really doing at Fuse is, like, to push forward the idea that, like, you don't have to do these trade-offs. Like, you can have ambitious projects and a healthy planet. You can have this, coupling of progress and preservation. Like, you can have both. I think there's a lot of things we can draw from, the infrastructure projects we used to build. And I very much think that we can, get back to a place where we can build great things fast in the real world. And I think that's going to be essential. Like, you've had like an era of like, with .com and, coming into like AI and everything. Like, we're slowly moving back from like software and SaaS back into infrastructure again. You see that with like AI and data centers and, Meta starting to trade power now on power markets themselves. Like, we're slowly moving back towards the physical layer again. And I think, the reason why I kind of have that there is I think it's, essential that we recognize that in order to like continue progress, as we move back into the kind of more fundamental layers of the stack, we need to be cognizant that like there's a lot of stuff that there's a lot of barriers we've put up for ourselves that we really need to like think about how we remove to move faster and push progress forward again.
Yeah, it's time to build. It's time to move back from maybe bits back to atoms, as the saying goes. And it's time to cover the big news that you guys released 2 days ago. So on Monday, November 24th, you put out a no action letter from the SEC for Fuse Energy and for the energy token. So if you could maybe just give us a high level of like what that means for the company, maybe the work that went into it, and why our audience should be interested and should be looking out.
Yeah, happy to. So, I mean, this is huge for us and huge for the industry overall. So like what it represents is, like, for starters, like months of constructive engagement with the SEC, working with, both our general counsel, working with our external counsel at Latham's, working with the commission and the crypto task force to essentially get to this state where they kind of, there's a public recognition of kind of what we're trying to build. From our perspective, Fuse is, regulated in two different heavily regulated sectors, energy and crypto. Both of our founders, come from early Revolut, very heavily regulated financial company. We are very risk averse when it comes to regulatory compliance. And we want to be as compliant as possible. But what it means is it essentially gives us a lot of confidence that that we can go into the US and that we have a positive relationship with the SEC. And it sends a very clear signal to the rest of the industry that essentially the US is open for business. That the SEC is willing to engage with the industry to kind of, have constructive dialogue and with teams, and is looking and working with us to facilitate, compliant token launches in the US. And that's something ultimately, it's kind of going back to, the kind of crypto task force and Project Crypto that was set up, with the kind of North Star of making crypto the center of innovation, or making the US the center of crypto innovation in the world. And I think that, this is a very clear, these letters are very clear kind of milestones towards that goal. And that's why it's such a big thing for us, as a heavily regulated company, very risk averse from a compliance perspective, at least. Getting this kind of, I guess, acknowledgement, gives us a lot of confidence for launching in the US, and also, confidence that the industry as a whole is, moving in the right direction in America.
Well, cool. I mean, I want to jump into the business now a bit. I mean, there's a couple things to highlight up front, I think. So you guys announced a $10 million raise in July, bringing your total raise to, I think, around $100 million. But I think way more importantly, and something that a lot of our audience is not aware of, is you've scaled from, I believe it's 100 million in annualized revenue to 300 million in the same 4-month period since July. You guys have done a good job keeping your Twitter up to date. So are those numbers right, first off? And then second off, maybe let's break down where is the insane growth coming from? What are the different business units? Where's all this revenue coming from in such a short time span? Just really curious to start breaking it down.
Yeah, happy to. I guess just to start off, maybe to give a bit of background on what Fuse is. We're basically a verticalized energy company. So what we do is we've essentially built about 10 companies at once across the energy stack. Everything from, building wind and solar farms, acquiring them and operating them, in-house trading desks on power markets, to regulated supply businesses that, supply customers and bill them for their energy every month, for electricity and gas. And then, installations, as well as, kind of international expansion of that kind of business model, exporting it to different nations. So basically the kind of background on the kind of growth is that we earlier this year, kind of working, we had a product that supplied electricity to, homes in the UK currently. And, we had about, 50,000 customers, coming up towards mid-year. One of the things that we noticed, which was kind of a big thing for people, was that a lot of people, and this goes for kind of worldwide, not just UK, a lot of people have gas as well as electricity, right? And a lot of people don't want to pay two different providers for their electricity and their gas. By launching gas, we effectively quadrupled our TAM. So that's essentially what happened kind of mid Q3, early Q3 this year. That was kind of one of the big catalysts to kind of the hockey stick growth we've seen since. So yeah, numbers are true. We're well above, we're above 300 mil ARR now. And, the majority of that, vast majority of that has been added kind of, in the last 4 months. So it's been crazy growth. Team is, started off the year with around 100. We're now 220. And, looking to hire more great people. We probably 10x the engineering team if we could tomorrow. Because there's, a lot of jobs to be done. But yeah, growth's been great. We're looking to launch, kind of Ireland, Spain, US, potentially some other kind of European countries next year and towards the end of next year, for our kind of supply businesses. And then, obviously, kind of launch the energy network on top of that too very soon.
Yeah. What are out of all the kind of different pieces of the vertically integrated stack, the different business units, like what are the maybe 2 or 3 biggest drivers of revenue? I'd assume maybe it's the utility side.
Yeah, it's essentially like we now provide 200,000 homes with energy and bill them every month for it. That's the kind of key driver. Like we have people, 200,000 users already, paying for services under our group, who are already, have an app installed and are using it. So that's the kind of core driver of this growth right now.
Yeah, it's a lot of potential like crypto token economy stakeholders to have as well. But for the utilities, maybe this is just me being naive about energy markets, but like they're typically oligopolies in the end markets that they serve, right? So like, are you guys acquiring, when you expand to a new geography or gain new customers, are you acquiring an existing utility, or are you like literally building out new power gas lines like from the ground up? How does that work?
Really good question. Because especially like some of your US audience won't be super familiar with this, just because of the way or by virtue of the structure of the market here. In some markets, like the supply of energy is quote unquote deregulated, which basically means there is a bunch of independent providers and you choose your provider for your gas and electricity the same way you choose your provider for your mobile or your Wi-Fi. Like there's essentially, it's just a competitive market where you compare prices and then you sign up to like based on, price, product, customer experience, that kind of thing. So that is the case for some US markets, but not all of them. So for instance, like Texas is a completely deregulated market, which means, everyone in Texas is provided energy and by an independent provider. In other states, it depends. So other states, there's some states in the US where it's essentially just run by the government, which is essentially there isn't an independent market for it. And then other states, there's kind of like this kind of half-baked kind of setup where there is like a incumbent utility, like for instance, Con Edison in New York. There's kind of this incumbent entity that like by default is the kind of supplier of gas and electricity to everybody. But there's this independent market as well, where you can actually sign up to independent providers if you want. But what it actually means, like we're not right now like building the physical wires. Essentially, the grid systems are kind of one of the few markets or sectors where, for the physical wires for like large distribution and transmission, monopolies kind of make sense. Right.
For sure.
You don't want 10 different grids in a certain area, right? And you don't want like, it's essentially, it's a waste of infrastructure basically that we're already struggling to build. So essentially what you have like these semi-regulated monopolies. So like for instance, in the UK, like Buffett owns one of them for part of the UK. I think it's Western Power Grid. They who own the grid infrastructure and operate the grid infrastructure. And then they essentially charge like toll fees for you to, for where if you generate power from like one of your sites or you're buying it from the wholesale market and then, you're delivering it to homes, they charge you essentially a toll fee to use the wires. So you can kind of think about it as roads and highways and toll fees for that.
It sounds super similar to the telecom industry, actually. So I think there's the tower companies and then there's the MNOs, the mobile network operators. There's probably like 4 of them in the US that either own the towers or actually I think they used to own the towers and they spun them out, but now they rent space on the towers. So they have the radios on the towers, but then you have all these MVNOs, mobile virtual network operators that don't own any underlying infrastructure, but they do marketing, customer service. They have a brand, they have a mobile app. And so they're competing to basically own the end customer, do better marketing, have better customer service, And those are like Helium Mobile is one of those. I'm a subscriber of Helium Mobile. There's Boost, there's Mint. There's usually like a celebrity as the marketing kind of spokesperson for them. But that's the analogy that comes to mind here. So that makes a lot of sense though. And it makes sense as to why you could grow revenue so quickly, right? If you're not putting on your construction hard hat and, laying a bunch of wires or lines in different places.
Yeah. And I mean, like, I think, as part of our kind of master plan, we do want to start building grid infrastructure down the line. That is the plan. So like, basically right now, from a kind of unit economics perspective, we kind of dominate against competitors. From a customer service standpoint, we dominate competitors. From a product experience standpoint, we dominate competitors. What we want to do is we want to move, kind of further down the infrastructure stack. So like we are building sites, but eventually the plan is to, essentially own the grids and wires ourselves, because essentially we think that we can operate them more efficiently. We can build them more efficiently. And we've already seen this with like solar farms we've built. We've built them at a 30% discount to what the industry standard is, by virtue of essentially hiring just, the best engineering minds to solve real world problems. So it's definitely on the master plan. But it's something to come.
Yeah, it's kind of the Elon approach of like building things from the ground up and thinking with first principles, and
everything we do is first principles based. Yeah, and it's funny. It's actually like energy is one of those industries. Like when you kind of like step back, the kind of two critical sectors of the next couple of years is it's AI and by dependence then energy. And there's plenty of smart people in AI right now, but there's actually not that many smart people in energy. It's still an industry that is kind of historically pretty unsexy, and is kind of, dominated by these, tech incumbents, or these like tech backward incumbents that essentially have been around for decades and have no incentive to change. And that's very much what like banking was before, these neobanks like Revolut and Nubank. Prior to these neobanks, you were more likely to get a divorce than change your bank account. There was like just no churn in the industry, no incentive to change. And then energy is kind of similar to that and a couple of years behind. And essentially what we want to do is we want to bring as many smart people into energy and solve this problem as possible. Because ultimately, right now, the thing that's stopping us building, the things that's stopping us like advancing AI, building more data centers, building more factories, essentially reducing the cost of doing fundamentally anything in the real world, which is energy. We need as many smart people working on this problem as possible. And that's very much, kind of what, our founders saw 3 years ago when they left Revolut and were like, what is the next industry that really badly needs attention?
Yeah. And maybe that's a great segue to like some of the key tailwinds or headwinds for the energy sector and Fuse specifically. Like what are some of the factors that are helping your expansion into the US and you think will help you grow? And what are some of the factors that are like, this is like maybe a US specific issue we have to get over, or just some difficulties in the industry right now that we're going to have to push through?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think I'll split this into, kind of just general market entry, go to market regulatory stuff, and then just more fundamental infrastructure. So I guess number one is that a lot of states in the US, are in this kind of deregulated state from a regulation perspective. And historically, the participants and the kind of companies that have like filled that are essentially cowboys. In New York, you've got like one of the ways you can structure an energy company in New York is you can get Con Ed to continue billing the customer, but essentially you take over the kind of commodity charges on the bill. So essentially you're responsible for how much they're paying per kilowatt hour of like the physical energy. And then, Con Ed, keep everything else and bill the customer. So as a consequence, like the way that's been structured, there's no actual like face off or interaction with the customer and, this independent energy company. And that's kind of like, while like I really am in favor of like deregulation, like doing it like in that kind of respect is a bit of an anti-pattern, because you essentially give people permission to operate in the shadows a little bit. Because they don't have a face off with the customer. Like Con Ed are the people billing them. And like I can offer you a $100 Amazon voucher to sign up to my kind of, independent energy provider. And then, I'm essentially passing my charges through Con Ed. I give you 3 months and I hike up the charges, and you essentially get screwed over, right? And that's kind of, the way a lot of like historically, when commissions have had issues with independent energy companies, it's because of that. It's because of like essentially people operating kind of, in the, in essentially the shadows and not, facing off with the customer. And I think, what we're really looking to do is unify the customer experience and, face off with the customer ourselves. So we can provide a full customer experience. We face off with the customer. We provide the customer service. We are accountable for the service we provide. And that's something that I think I would really like to see kind of, pushed along, because it's very easy, I think, for like, commissions to see, okay, historically, this is how things have run and people have been screwed over. We don't like this. We're essentially going to like cut this industry off, right? But instead, I think, it's actually a case of, leaning more into it and being like, actually, if we force these guys to face off with customers, provide a product to customers, we actually give them accountability to act properly. And that's actually what you really see in like fully deregulated states like, Texas or the UK. The suppliers are front and center in terms of providing the service to the customers and being accountable for how they provide it. So I think, in terms of like where I'd like to see the kind of industry going here, I think, more focus around, okay, these independent providers can provide really cool, innovative products for customers above and beyond what the kind of vanilla stuff that utilities are providing. So like, let's actually give them the ability to do that and face off with the customer and give them, kind of the rails to do that. So essentially there's a lot of different states that are kind of, at different stages along this kind of timeline towards, actually being able to facilitate this full unified customer experience. So I think I'd just like to see that trend continue here. So that's, I guess, kind of regulation side. From a more general, I guess, kind of infrastructure side, when you're trying to build anything like these kind of AI data centers, when you're trying to build like, even a new site like a solar farm or wind farm, new power plant, new factory, often the barrier is not lack of investment. It's often not even really planning. Depends on the state or the nation. But what the barrier is the grid. And the big problem that we've seen in, building across the stack is that grids are struggling to scale. So essentially you've got electricity demand reaching unprecedented levels, but the grids and essentially, the kind of infrastructure that it's running on were built last century, never envisioned for the kind of demands that we're putting on it today. And basically what you're getting is you're getting these big centralized, kind of demand centers. And, historically, these big centralized kind of power stations and a very thin, capacity line separating them. And what you have is you've got limited capacity. Peak demand means essentially what our grids are now experiencing is incredibly severe network congestion. The result is basically like super volatile energy prices, decade-long delays if you want to actually build a new factory or data center or site and connect it to the grid. And essentially what also like stranded cheap power. If you're generating tons of cheap power somewhere and you've got limited capacity to move it to where it's needed, often what you're actually wasting it. So like the stat is something like $70 billion of cheap power has been just wasted, essentially stranded in the last 5 years since 2020, which is insane. It's the biggest unsolved problem in energy today. And it's actually quite an interesting, I guess this kind of, leads into what we're trying to do with the energy network, right? Because the analogy, of, network congestion is, a mental model that's super clear in, crypto natives' minds, right? We get peak network usage, on the grids, it's during the evenings and, during heat waves and cold snaps, that kind of thing. And you've got limited capacity. And basically that leads to spikes in energy prices, almost gas prices, right? And you kind of essentially undermines the stability of the network as a whole. We've seen havoc in energy markets because of this. We've seen the US Department of Energy put out a report recently that is warning that blackouts could increase by 100x in the next 5 years because of this. So it's essentially it's a super urgent problem. It's incumbent upon us that if we can unlock grid capacity, if we can rapidly scale energy demand, we can build and grow faster. Maybe to kind of step back for a second, if you look at kind of historically and across the world, the GDP per capita of countries is really closely correlated to how much energy consumption that country uses. What you have is, increased energy consumption equals increased progress. So kind of fundamentally, what our kind of organizing belief at Fuse is that we exist to create, kind of an era of clean, cheap, and abundant energy. Because we believe that, if you can create that, you can do things faster, you can push progress forward. I guess that kind of, leads into how are we going to do it? So, and that's what the energy network is going to do. So the energy network is designed to essentially be a scaling layer for our physical grids. You can, the kind of easy mental model is it's an L2 for the physical grid, right? So it's what we're looking to do is coordinate flexible, smart energy devices that are distributed through millions of homes already, just sitting there unused, coordinate them to shift energy to essentially reduce network congestion at times of peak demand. And that's essentially what it is. So these smart energy devices are things like, smart thermostats, batteries, solar panels, EV chargers, which are basically just big batteries on wheels. And, all of these devices are there's millions of them sitting in homes unused for this purpose. And grids and, utility operators are, crying out for these services. It kind of broadly comes under ancillary services is the technical definition. But these are becoming increasingly strained everywhere, increasingly expensive everywhere, because essentially the grid is just slowly creaking under this network congestion problem. So basically, what we want to do is we want to create this energy network, which is going to coordinate these devices, incentivize people with energy dollars, and get people to register, device agnostic, by the way, no proprietary hardware needed, and essentially passively earn while helping us improve our grid security, while helping us, reduce the volatility in the energy markets, reduce energy prices, and ultimately, kind of push economic progress forward as a result.
Right. And maybe just to tie the knot on the previous conversation or thread, do you think capacity in terms of transmission capacity or energy generation are, which one is more of an issue? Obviously energy demand is increasing for a lot of reasons, but do you think are we capacity constrained in terms of the transmission of energy between different places, or is the actual generation of or supply of energy more of the problem?
The constraint is capacity, not generation.
Okay.
There are the backlog of projects wanting and waiting to connect to the grid is insane. You're talking decades. So and we've seen this firsthand ourselves, right? We've scoured, the UK is a start. We've scoured Western or Eastern US, bunch of parts in Europe. You can have a site that, we've got planning permission, we're ready for engineering, procurement, construction, all of this is kind of, we have the land, but when you go and apply to the operator to, say, can we connect here? Can we plug into the grid here? The delay you can see is over a decade. Basically what they say is, we just haven't got capacity for you to plug in here.
Wow.
And what you're seeing, if you read any of the reports, you're seeing that like there's a huge backlog of projects and generation waiting to connect, but that just can't because there's no capacity on the grid. So that is the bottleneck.
Yeah, that's a great explanation. And so then the solutions to that, right, are to either build more capacity, which I would assume means like laying more energy lines, or to decrease or to shift demand in terms of like demand response, which is kind of what you guys are looking to do with the energy network. So maybe before we dive into that, like, are there plans broadly or that you've seen, maybe in different countries to like literally lay more power lines or like increase capacity that way? Or, is that kind of like a lost cause for some reason, and demand response and shifting demand is really the only way forward?
I think the shifting demand is the short term, like is a much faster fix that we can do right now. Building new grid infrastructure, kind of harks back to my point around the Empire State Building being built in 410 days. We cannot build new transmission lines in 410 days anymore, at least not right now. We can, we scoped this, and we were getting, we scoped building it ourselves, a year or two back, and it was 25-year timelines for building new transmission lines, right? Look, ultimately, it's something that we want to do eventually. We think we can do well, and we think we can do fast. And it's like acquiring, utilities and acquiring, this physical grid infrastructure and improving it. But it's going to take years. And we haven't really got the luxury to wait that long right now. We need solutions that'll work today. And if you have, and that's essentially what we're looking to leverage we're looking to do with the energy network. So this is the, demand side flexibility, like you said. It's instead of, increasing the lines and the number of lines, which we will do eventually, what you can do right now is you can have all of these devices in homes shift electricity to reduce congestion, essentially. And that's when you have that, what you're essentially doing is you're incentivizing local consumption and use of electricity, and essentially getting around the grid completely. And given that so many of these devices are already installed, millions, gigawatts, and are sitting there unused, that for us is like something that is, if it essentially is just waiting for a good platform to coordinate, to effectively onboard and coordinate them, to improve the grid operations.
Yeah, and incentivize them, right? So it sounds like a couple of the examples I've heard in the past are like, say I have the Fuse Energy app for some reason, whether I'm a utility customer or maybe I've just, heard of the project, but I guess I need to be a utility customer of yours, right? Because you need to be kind of like, you need to have the ability to tap into my smart energy devices, but maybe I give you guys the leeway or the flexibility to adjust my thermostat a bit during peak hours of the day, like 1 or 2 degrees. Doesn't matter much to me, but like in aggregate over many, many people that can shift demand in a way that's impactful. Or maybe I have solar and a battery, and I kind of plug that into your system to allow you to discharge energy from my battery or directly from the solar panels, like as energy is being generated. And again, like on a one-off, one person basis, this doesn't matter much, but when you aggregate the capacity over many, many people, I think it can. I guess one, do I need to be a utility customer of yours? Like, do you need to be providing me energy for me to be involved here? And then also after that, like what are the incentives for me as a homeowner to shift my demand a bit, or to give you access to like my solar or my battery?
But yeah, you're exactly right. It's a many hands make light work kind of situation, right? A lot of small actions in aggregate make up something big. For now, you do need to be a utility customer of Fuse. And that is just because so Fuse Energy, the company, essentially acts as a participation layer for the network. And we face off with all of the regulated entities in the energy market, across both, consumer regulation, markets, and all of the kind of settlement and data operations and everything needs to be coordinated by a kind of regulated entity. So right now, the way it works is that you have to be a kind of utility customer of Fuse in order to participate. But that's something that we're kind of looking at, seeing if we can maybe expand down the line. In terms of essentially the kind of incentive and maybe the kind of UX of participating, it's very simple actually. Me as a user, I log onto the Fuse app. I can connect my device from the Fuse app. App is device agnostic. So, like let's say you have, a wall box EV charger or, like a Tesla Powerwall. Like we support like the vast majority of manufacturers and models. So you essentially sign in to your account with Tesla and from the Fuse app, you kind of grant access. You can set parameters around how you want that device to be used. So let's say I want my EV to be charged 80% by 8 a.m. In the morning. I want my battery to, let's say, not go below 40% ever or during the operation. And we optimize around those constraints. And we do that passively in the background. So once you set that, it's a set and forget kind of thing. You onboard, you connect your device, you set the constraints, that's it. And what we do is then we essentially, kind of onboard that within the energy network, optimize it in the background, shift the energy usage. You don't really notice anything. And you kind of essentially earn tokens in the background. The token is the energy dollar that you earn. And when you earn that, after you earn that, you can obviously, trade it in secondary markets. But you can also use it to burn it to unlock discounts on, kind of most products in the kind of Fuse ecosystem, which is a slowly kind of expanding base of goods and services. So that kind of essentially closes the kind of the UX loop or the kind of tokenomics loop. But ultimately, what we wanted to do is develop something that is like a real utility, is not just like some speculative asset, and that's something that kind of the SEC, clearly kind of I guess acknowledges, and something that I think if we want to push this industry forward, we really need to focus on providing real world utility over kind of basically a wrapper on a meme coin, for want of a better term. But yeah, so that's essentially the kind of overview of how you can participate, how you can earn, what you can do with it.
Yeah, are there plans to expand the token's utility maybe beyond like this kind of consumer facing use case to maybe more of like enterprise mandated spend or like other parts of the vertically integrated business, right? Like a lot of DePIN's, it seems, maybe tie their token to like almost like a commodity or like spend on the commodity. So like Helium, it's like, AT&T is this big enterprise and their customers are roaming onto the Helium network. And so basically they're paying Helium or the Helium network for like data transfer, which is a very kind of like high level commodity like thing. So the energy token, it seems like is mostly like a consumer rebate to start. But do you see its use expanding to like other parts of the business, and maybe like having enterprises be purchasing it and spending it because of some other service that Fuse or the energy network's providing to them?
Yeah, I think like this is something we really want to focus on over the coming months and years. Really, is like for starters, just expanding the use case for the token, expanding the utility. Like I think it'd be awesome for us to like, we're planning on doing public EV charging, and so like essentially worldwide EV charging networks. You can use the Fuse app to like charge and route your EV from, do navigation. And then, kind of energy bills, I think it'd be awesome as well. And then like we're planning to launch commercial, I think it's going to be the back half of next year, commercial supply and commercial services. So, I'd love to see the utility expand of the token expand into that as well. Can't commit to anything too early, but that's kind of, broadly where we're thinking about increasing the utility of the token.
I mean, it sounds like there's a plan to move at least one part of the business, like the utility part of the business, from just residential to commercial at some point, right? And so then you'll have larger contracts going on and larger kind of enterprises being involved with the token, which I think is great.
Oh yeah, I guess just on the kind of like more commodity side of things, like I think like the burn and mint equilibrium model that like Helium used with like H&T and data credits and stuff, really interesting. Like kind of is a cool model, especially when you're like looking to kind of serve what is effectively a commodity, right? Like data or bandwidth or, in our case, energy. One of the things that we're pretty focused on is making this product as easy to use and easy to understand and parsable to the regular user as possible. And that includes Web 2 users. Like you can think what you want about scanning eyeballs, but one of the things that I thought was pretty cool what WorldCoin did was that like apparently like it was like a majority of the customers that they onboarded or users they onboarded were first-time crypto users. Like huge boon for Web3 adoption. And I think that comes from like creating a product that is super understandable and easy to use. So like that's why we decided to not go with a, kind of 2 token model, burn and mint equilibrium type model. Because we essentially like first and foremost want this to be, easily adoptable by everybody. And that kind of decision and design philosophy is really percolated through every part of the product. We've got, kind of a saying internally that is like, would grandma understand this feature? Would grandma be able to use this? And that kind of is how we've designed everything. So like, we're looking at we've got like self-custodial wallets, but with, in the app, but, embedded with social logins, simple PIN, Face ID, recovery, that kind of stuff. Like a lot of the, icky or, hard to understand or kind of worrisome bits of crypto UX, we're very much looking to abstract away from people. And I think that's like super important because, we have, a captive retail base of 200,000 people that we're launching this product into, right? It's really important that they like understand it and it feels seamless for them with the rest of the product.
Yeah. And when you mentioned that 200,000 number, obviously you're planning to have that grow, but that's a lot of probably all new crypto users or a lot of them. So I think that's great for the industry. It's great for Solana, where you're launching from. Sean, we've covered a ton. Is there anything else you want to hit or any kind of teasers or highlights you want to share maybe for 2026 or just whatever's on the roadmap? Yeah,
I mean, I think, look, we're gonna use some beta testing next month, starting in December. And, we've got listings planned for January. So I think the best place to follow us is Fuse Energy on X. And that's where we'll keep people updated. We've got a bunch of exciting stuff coming through the line, a bunch of exciting announcements. So, that's all I'll say. Stay tuned.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for coming on, man. This was great and very excited to follow the progress over the next couple of years.
Appreciate it, Connor. This is my first podcast, actually. So
let's go, man. You did a great job.
Appreciate you having me on. It's been great.
For sure.